you for your time this morning. So my name's Rosalind Lake. I'm a director at Norton Rose Fulbright, specializing in competition, consumer and data privacy law. And today I'm joined by my associate, James, who will introduce himself.
Morning, everyone. My name's James, as Roz indicated. I'm an associate in the competition department at Norton Rose as well. And today we're just going to take you through the fresh produce market inquiry, the recent terms of reference, and obviously what this means for, I think, Agri SA as a whole, as well as the individual members.
Wonderful. Thanks. So just a couple of housekeeping rules. If everyone can please make sure that they're muted. And then also, we'll have a little bit of time to have some questions and answers at the end. But if you want to just drop your question into the chat while you think about it so that you don't forget until the end, that's also, we can also do that. Okay. Sorry, can I just ask everyone to make sure that they're muted?
This is specifically Julie, you're not muted. Julie, you're not muted. Please mute your mic.
Okay, cool. Well done.
All
right, thank you. Okay. All right, so as James indicated, we what we're going to do today is to just give you a little bit of an overview of how market inquiries work when they're run by the competition authorities, what this particular inquiry is focused on, and what that might mean for you, and the things that you need to start thinking about in terms of how it might affect your business operations. So just sort of an overview of what we are what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to chat to you just a little bit about the background to the inquiry, what a market inquiry is, what does this actually mean for you, and then James is going to take you through the focus areas, so what the fresh produce market inquiry is the theories of harm that the competition authorities is going to be looking at, and then we'll chat a little bit about what this means for you, or things that you need to kind of prepare for or think about. Just a note is that this meeting is being recorded, and I understand it will be distributed to members after this, so you can watch again if you aren't able to take notes. Okay, so just kicking off, let's talk a little bit about the background or how we got here. The Competition Commission has long said that it will focus on the things that really affect the poorest of the poor consumers. And obviously, agro-processing and fresh produce is one of those areas that has a significant impact. James, can you just go to the next slide, please? So the Commission has been looking into this market since, certainly since 2008, when we had the first big penalty for the bread cartel. And there've been a number of investigations into the sector, and I'm saying more broadly, sort of agro-processing. But what has happened is, particularly during COVID, when the particular regulations were issued about essential goods and determining what were essential foods in particular, there's been an increased focus by the Competition Commission on the pricing of fresh produce and what they consider essential items. So apart from receiving complaints and dealing with complaints in terms of the COVID regulations and generally in terms of the Competition Act, the Commission's kind of advocacy and market study teams have in parallel been watching pricing across the whole agro-processing sector. They've been monitoring how the pricing has changed over the last couple of years, and they've been doing a few inquiries to see what it is that's driving the changes. Now, obviously, everyone is aware of the significant impact and importance of the role of agriculture in South Africa. It's a worrying trend that DTIC has been very concerned about for some time, is the decrease in the number of commercial farmers, particularly those at scale, challenges for particularly farmers who are historically disadvantaged to get into a farming operation with the right skills, funding, and all of those sorts of things. These have been real issues, and there have been a number of interventions by the DTIC to try and remedy these issues. But you will all know better than us the challenges that come with farming, even when all things are going well, when you have electricity and access to petrol and all of those good things. So, it is something that has been earmarked as saying we need to look at this. And it's particularly in light of, government's focus on trying to create jobs in a variety of areas, particularly for unskilled persons. And so, although this is about the competition dynamics within the sector, which we'll get to, it's also really looking basically at the state of the industry. And what is it that is driving different outcomes? Are those anti-competitive outcomes because of behavior of people in the market, or are there other things in play that make it almost impossible for people to conduct themselves differently? And so, this is a market inquiry that comes off the back. The Competition Commission has done a number of market inquiries. What is different, and we'll talk to you today about the consequences, is that the previous market inquiries like public health, the grocery market retail inquiry, public transport, banking, a whole range. In those market inquiries, the Competition Commission didn't have the same sort of powers that they have now. Nor were the grounds to initiate a market inquiry so low in terms of the barrier that needed to be met. And I think just to understand, as we're talking today, is we are coming up to election times. There is a lot of focus, I think, on a government wanting to demonstrate that it is achieving the things that it has set out to do. And obviously things that, hit consumers in their, their food bill, I think is going to be something that they want to champion. And so it does seem to us that there's a fair amount of pressure from the DTIC to encourage the Commission to be looking into these markets. And so we expect there to be adequate resources allocated. Okay, next slide, please. So just in a bit of context, so what is a market inquiry? So the Competition Commission has very, very broad powers, a whole range of them. But most of the time, what they deal with is someone brings a complaint to them and says, someone's price fixing, someone's refusing to supply me, and those sorts of things. And the Commission then deals with those each on a case-by-case basis. And then they also deal with mergers that come in. But what the Competition Act says, and this is all over the world, it's not just in South Africa, is that there are sometimes, there's no obvious evidence of collusion or obvious abuses of dominance by players in the market. But for some reason, there are just a number of factors that mean that you're not getting competitive outcomes in a market. So as an example, in the private healthcare inquiry, the conclusion was that it was government failure that had led to the failure of the market. It was a failure to regulate effectively had resulted in a market failure. And so the Commission doesn't necessarily only look at the conduct of participants in the market. It gives them an opportunity to have a broad overarching view at all of the factors that impact. And you'll see from when James talked to you about the specifics is, they are going to look very broadly about, what are the licensing requirements? What do you need to be able to operate in this market? Because the intention of the Commission is to try and understand the market in a way that they can then propose remedies that will fix what they've identified as a problem. So, it's sometimes there will have been a number of complaints that will lead to an investigation in a market inquiry, but a lot of the time it's just, the Commission's done a number of investigations, mergers, and they just see that there's something that they need to figure out what that is and whether it can be remedied. So the kind of thing that the Commission looks at in a market inquiry is, how competitive is it? Are people fighting in the trenches, or, is there a comfortable, mature market where there isn't much rivalry? What are the main factors that are influencing price? Why are those prices increasing? What is it? What are the driving factors? Is it things outside of the control of participants? Is it because there are less farmers? Is, supply and demand factors will be looked at. There'll also barriers to entry and challenges are going to be very important, because this is often when we look at competition, the ease of entry into a market is often indicative of how competitive it is or how attractive it is for market participants. And then obviously, particularly given the possibility for unskilled labor, they often look at what benefits there are in the sector for the growth of employment and trying to create new jobs. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, the Commission can look at any feature or a combination of features to see what it is that distorts or restricts or impedes competition. As an example, the Competition Commission is currently doing an investigation into online platforms. It has been extended from the initial period, but they really are going very, very broadly in order to try and understand what is going to work in this region and or this area, and we're going to see the same things here. So, the Commission is going to particularly look at, and I've already explained this, the market structure, the outcomes. Often competition law works a lot with theory. Like these things, if these two things are present, we would expect to see an increase in prices, for example. And sometimes it doesn't work that way, and that can lead to distortions in the market or the value chain that might be causing consequences to pricing, for example, or availability, or any of the other factors that people compete on. And then the other thing that they will be looking at is something that it's very hard for the Commission to investigate in a complaint, because it doesn't easily fit into a complaint structure. There are a lot of defenses, but they will be looking at, whether there is a possibility that even if there's no agreement between competitors, are they actually colluding with one another on an understanding basis? So you don't have an explicit agreement, but your conduct is coordinated. And just as a general point, is the competition authorities, particularly African competition authorities, are really obsessed with concentration of markets, meaning they're few players, or where you have big players. Now, the reality is that there have been a number of failures in the South African market, particularly in trade protection, that has just resulted in there being less players. And it's going to be really important in this for the Commission to not equate concentration or a limited number of players immediately with an anti-competitive outcome. So it's going to be important in engaging with the Commission for them to sort of understand and not to make assumptions about certain effects that happen in the market. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in a market inquiry, it takes form in a number of ways. You can have public hearings. You can have. Oh, Lizanne, please will you turn off your. Thank you. So this is very broad again, because it is, it's not just looking at the number of individual firms who've been impacted. So trade unions can participate. I can bet you that FAR will be there. And people from within the commission, anyone who has a material interest, the minister, and firms in the market. So, because the commission is limited to a period of time within which to do this inquiry, they have to keep it fairly narrow in focus, because there's so much about the sector to learn about and for them to understand. So they will probably keep quite a tight schedule, and they will already have a very good idea about who they want to speak to in the sector. Now, whether you're obligated to participate, it's a bit tricky, because the commission definitely prefers people to cooperate voluntarily. They really want people to come forward with information to help them to understand the market. I mean, remember that the people at the Competition Commission, they don't work in business, they don't farm, that's for sure, they don't supply anyone. And so there's often, in all investigations with the commission, there's a lot of learning that the commission's team has to do so that they can make recommendations that make sense. Because they may look at it from a purely academic perspective, but not understand the impact on the market. And so they like to look at a broad range of people. And so they will send out information requests to market participants. Now, the commission doesn't, in my experience, really understand the time, resource, impact of responding to a request for information, particularly when they're far-reaching. And so, you are not compelled to participate unless the commission uses its powers that include the ability to summon someone to answer. And that can have consequences if you don't respond to that. Next slide, please. So, the important thing to understand here as well is what the commission is looking at is they're not looking for, a substantial limitation of competition. I'm not saying that people can't compete. What they're looking at is it's a lower bar than that. It's like, what is adversely affecting competition? What's making it harder for people to compete? What's making it more difficult for consumers to get good outcomes? So it's a pretty low bar for them to be then placed to recommend a remedy. But it's important to understand that, as I said, the commission would prefer voluntary cooperation. And in these market inquiries, people do often voluntarily participate, particularly industry associations. But the commission does have the power to issue a summons to an individual and for them to bring documents. It's the same as it would be a subpoena in court proceedings, but it's called a summons. Now that once you are summoned to provide information, a failure to answer truthfully or a failure to comply with the summons is actually a criminal offense. So parties can be referred to the National Prosecuting Authority for that. So, and you'll see the sort of the tone of what we're talking to you about is you need to be thinking about, is this something that I voluntarily want to engage in? Do I want to wait to hear from the commission? Do I have information that I think is helpful? And to sort of ahead of the game, start thinking about your positioning and where you'd like to be in this inquiry so that you're not on the back foot when they come and ask for information. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just as a general point is that the commission, as we said, has very far-reaching powers to make recommendations to fix what they see as causing an anti-competitive effect in the market. Now, this can be very challenging because we've seen even in other markets where the commission has not carried out an investigation or has not carried out a market inquiry, for example, automotive, and they've simply issued guidelines on how they think things should go in the market. The commission then tends to think that their guidelines are law and that they can bring complaints based on those guidelines. And so, it is important to bear in mind that giving the commission such power to implement recommendations means that you might have some outcomes that don't make sense for your sector, or which cost you a lot of money to comply with, or just don't align. So the Commission can make recommendations to the Competition Tribunal in terms of what can be done. The kind of suggestions we've seen, or the recommendations we've seen in other inquiries, is a sort of a code of practice for industry participants, particular disclosure requirements for terms, recommendations of setting up a sector regulator, setting up, particular specific legislation to be published by the DTIC. So it can be very far-reaching, and can have a significant impact on the way you run your business. Something that has been really controversial, but what we haven't seen yet, is that the Commission has the power to recommend the breaking up of firms, in the sense that they could say, we think that too many parts of the value chain are owned by a particular business, and we are going to order that X, Y, and Z divests of whatever part of their business, and likely will have to sell it to a historically disadvantaged person. So that is the sort of the most far-reaching of the recommendations. That would have to be confirmed by the Competition Tribunal, and there are grounds for appeal, because it's pretty radical to make that recommendation. But I just want to highlight how broad-reaching these can be. The other thing as well is what they can do is, once they've done the market inquiry, they can say, okay, we think X, Y, and Z has contravened the Competition Act, and so we're going to refer them straight to the Competition Tribunal for a hearing. Or we're going to immediately enter into a settlement with them. Or we're going to have to investigate further. And so as soon as you have a competition authority digging around your sector and looking for information on practices and so on, there is a much heightened risk for prosecution for competition complaints and competition contraventions. So it really is something to just make sure that your house is in order. So there's a lot of potential consequences of this inquiry in terms of what may be required. And as I said at the beginning, I think given the nature of it and its impact on poor consumers, I think the Commission is probably going to feel quite compelled to remedy issues. Depending on what the source of those issues are, the remedy might not actually solve the problem, but it might impact participants in the market. So again, it's really important for the Commission to be helped so that they understand and make good recommendations that are not going to make things worse for anyone. Okay. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to hand over to James now, who's going to take you through the specific terms of reference.
Thanks very much, Ros. And yeah, I think so now we sort of understand what a market inquiry is, what the Competition Commission can do, what powers it has, and obviously how it can affect, all of you. So I think now the question is, what is the fresh produce market inquiry, and how does it work? How is it likely to sort of play out, and all of those features. So I think looking at the fresh produce inquiry in more detail, and obviously Ros broadly touched on this, is that the purpose of this inquiry is to examine whether there are any features, in the value chain which impede, restrict, or distort competition. And again, we've obviously got a very low bar here, so that's what they're looking for. And I suppose that the question the Commission is asking here is, as a result of these features that we see in the sector and in this market, have there been any adverse effects on competition? And when I say competition, I obviously refer to, and again, Ros touched on this, is the end consumer, is what are prices doing, what is the end consumer feeling, and obviously in this industry where, the price effects are even harder felt by the poor of the poor, that's really the Commission's focus in this inquiry. And I think, so this inquiry has been triggered by what the Commission has investigated and seen as a reduction specifically in farming units. And I think generally broad concerns over the recent price levels in fresh produce in South Africa, and how they seem to have sort of outstripped inflation. So what the Commission did is in November of 2021, they conducted a study which looked at concentration and participation. And again, concentration is obviously the number of players, who has what market share and the like in the South African economy. And they identified a sort of concerning levels of concentration in South Africa's fresh produce and agro-processing sectors. And as an example, the Commission cites their report and uses an example of the fact that in 2017, there were just over what they say about 40,000 farming units, which was a decrease of 31% if you compare it to the sort of roughly 58,000 farming units present in 1993. And similarly, they found a 65% drop in the number of potato farmers, for example, between 1993 and 2008. And, again, Ros touched on this, but obviously it's not only competition. There are a number of external factors that can obviously contribute to this. And I think the Commission acknowledges this, but again, they're looking at competition and how they can remedy what they see to be obviously, larger market concentrations and a small number of big players. And as a sort of starting point, the Commission postulates that this could be the result of the challenges that these sort of smaller scale, smallholding type farmers face in reaching economies of scale, which then obviously leads to decreased costs and maintaining profitability, which is essential in this industry. So what this inquiry will do is that it'll focus on both the particular and then obviously sort of ancillary issues at each layer of the value chain effectively. So all the way from the farm to the fork. So at each point along this sort of process. But obviously, so what the Commission has is they have only 18 months initially, at least. They can extend it, and we have seen a lot of extensions in the past. But given the political background and like, it's possible that they want to stick to this time frame of 18 months. So they only have 18 months to conduct this inquiry and produce a response. And as a result, they've sort of constrained their the inquiry to focus on the fruits and vegetables you see on the screen. But again, I must emphasize that if you look at apples, it's every sort of all the way from the inputs and the herbicides used right up until the sort of logistics in delivering the apples to the formal market and ultimately to the consumer. So while it's constrained in one sense, it is very, very broad in another. And I think you'll see is that the Commission will obviously start with a very broad approach and then start to narrow down on what they deem at least to be the sort of more problematic areas. So I think it's these kind of suppliers or participants that would consider engaging with the Commission, those in the agricultural sphere, fresh produce, food production, manufacturing, export-driven foreign exchange, agro-processing, logistics, it's these sort of industries. So I just thought I'd put up here is what this is straight from the Commission's sort of terms of inquiry or the launching of the fresh produce market inquiry. And this is how they understand the value chain. It's obviously quite interesting to see how they understand it. And again, a focus of, everyone involved all the way from the input suppliers to the end consumers. And you'll see, I just want to point out here that you'll see a reference to NFPMs, and these are the national food produce markets. And the Commission is quite interested in these as a concept, how they work, obviously, and they see these as the major link between the farmers and the formal markets. The Commission defines these as the physical infrastructure and accompanying services where the mostly wholesale of fresh produce takes place between producers and buyers. Again, very broad, and I think you'll see that you sort of start to narrow down as the Commission continues to conduct the inquiry. And I think a big point to take here is that what you've seen on screen is the Commission's view on the value chain. The Commission's, and Ros indicated this as well, the Commission's not the expert here. It's everyone else on this call that are the experts in this particular industry and the sector. So I think the consideration for everyone here is to consider how accurate their understandings are. And again, everything I'll be speaking about is based on the Commission's understandings of the sector and the industry, and obviously to what extent this may necessitate the need for you to engage or respond to the Commission, on what basis and what consequences this may obviously have. So again, I've just sort of outlined here the the hierarchy in the value chain, and I've given some examples of what the Commission will be looking at. So we've got inputs, producers, wholesale level, intermediary, wholesale, retail again, retail, and consumers. So obviously the inquiry is quite narrow in terms of the fruit and vegetables, but the scope of the inquiry is again the entire value chain, and you can see how wide and broad this may be. And obviously I think the Commission's going to poke around on all levels. So I think it's important to sort of produce an attitude, or sort of produce an understanding of where you are at as a entity. So just moving on. So basically what the Commission has done is, again, I think based on the time constraint and the fact that this is such a broad sector with so many different players, what they've done is they've outlined 3 sort of broad themes of inquiry in terms of reference, which the Commission has indicated that they will hope address these concerns of constraints on competition and market outcomes, in terms of which they view have sort of led to fewer players, with more players having larger market shares. And again, it's always about the welfare of the end consumer and how all these inputs may affect them. So the first of the themes is the efficiency of the value chain. And with the emphasis on the dynamics around fresh produce and the fresh produce market facility specifically. So this theme sort of, I think, stems from the concerns of stakeholders that they submit that the value chain at a sort of national level is inefficient and uncompetitive. And the Commission views as an imperative the role of the national food produce markets, which we touched on a bit earlier, to allow for equal trade opportunities, both on a large scale level, obviously, but more importantly, again, the Commission is focused on the small guys and how they're able to survive in this market. And they see these NFPMs as a really important opportunity for the smallholding farmers who obviously produce a smaller output and smaller quantity of produce to still get to market. And I think this is they see as a very important vehicle in getting to market. So in relation to the NFPMs, farmers obviously incur costs in the context of grading, packaging, transportation, and in addition, there's the Commission sees that there's normally a commission on fees, which is a percentage of goods sold. They also see other costs, ripening chambers, and all of these are levied against farmers and generally by agents and other middlemen who then sell the produce on behalf of the farmers. And the Commission's, I think, aim is to consider these issues in the context of efficiency. And they've highlighted that based on their previous studies, that particular focus will be placed on the lack of transparency in contractual agreements between, these retailers, the wholesalers, processors, logistics. And I think the challenges faced by historically disadvantaged people and price dispersion, which is, the variation in the process or the price across the sellers of the same item. So I think those are the sort of main broad themes that the Commission will focus on under this point. More specifically, again, I'm touching on the NFPMs, is that these are the sort of physical infrastructures and how, if I skip back a couple slides, how we connect between the farmers and ultimately the formal sort of retail sector. These markets are the node in the much larger fresh produce value chain, and then they'll be affected by variables that influence the flow of produce, such as selling, receiving, and dispatching the goods. So the important role of the NFPMs is that to allow an equal trade opportunity for both large scale and then smallholder or smaller farmers. The Commission sees these NFPMs as a marketing channel, effectively, for sort of producers to provide an accessible mechanism through which farmers can then connect with consumers. And I think the main concern from the Commission's perspective here is that there's a widening gap between the price the produce sort of leaves the farm at and when it reaches the retailer. So what's happening in between sort of farm gate and retail or fork, and what drives these further costs and further inputs and who's playing in this market effectively. If you think of, the efficiencies relating to logistics, storage, cold chain, gradient selection, packaging, transportation, I think these are all areas that the Commission, I think, will focus on in trying to understand, what's the add-on, what's the margin here, and in general, how efficient are these processes? Is there a few larger players? Are there many smaller players? How easy is it to enter this market specifically? So I think that's really going to be a focus area of the Commission. They've seen that there's been a lack of information available to some parties when trading in these markets. And again, price discrimination, which is the sale of goods, the same goods at different prices to, sellers or different players in this sort of intermediary chain based on, what they can afford or what they would pay. And again, they've also seen that there are challenges faced by, historically disadvantaged people or HDPs and market agents in dealing in these sort of markets, particularly in issues such as space allocation, costs, and historical ties, obviously influencing the decisions of larger producers. So these are sort of what the Commission sees in the value chain and how they might play out. And I think that, for everyone here is what you need to flag up front. The second area that the Commission has sort of indicated that they're going to focus on is the market dynamics of key inputs and how this drives, costs on producers and effectively everything else, right? Because that's the start of the value chain. So obviously, following the sort of COVID pandemic, this has highlighted many challenges in South Africa, at least, and this sector in relation to the reliance of the economy on imported inputs. Obviously, we are a net exporter of agricultural products, but we still seem to import a large share of inputs required to produce these products. Seeds, fertilizers, agrochemicals, such as herbicides, pesticides, and the like. So what the Commission has seen is that many of these inputs are imported or at least priced on an international basis. And of course, if you price on an international basis, or if you've got added import costs, this may lead to sort of significant cost effect on growers ultimately, or farmers. And obviously the smallholders and the smallholding farmers are hit the worst. So again, you can see that the Commission is obviously focused or concerned about the final consumer, but they are obviously as well concerned, and you'll also see it in the third focus areas, is the barriers to entry and the ability of smallholders and smallholdings to scale, and I think become sort of more effective in producing and contributing to the economy. So the Commission has been quite specific here on market dynamics, and they've laid out a couple factors that they are going to consider. These are the cost of key inputs and the impact on overall producer costs. Drivers of these costs, things like market structure, again, concentration, intellectual property. So obviously, if you've got a patent on, herbicides and the like, and again, the existence of any price discrimination, which is, the charging of different prices for the same product based on what the seller effectively thinks they can get the other party to agree on. And then you think of market dynamics and bargaining power and the like. And I think the Commission is obviously alive to all these factors and how they might all sort of contribute or be an input to drive the ultimate costs of these inputs. They also flag the role, or sort of, in their words, the lack thereof, of cooperatives or former cooperatives and public sector agricultural support in the provision of these inputs, and how that has helped or has heeded or hasn't helped the ability of these farmers to use inputs at a sort of cost-effective price. But again, I think as we mentioned earlier, the Commission is and acknowledges the fact that there are external factors. It's not only competition. So they have undertaken to look at impacts such as climate change and how that affects supply chains, and the knock-on effects of this. Because obviously, right from the start, an increase in input leads to a knock-on effect all the way up to the top of the value chain, and how this may affect the end consumer. So the last theme or focus area of the inquiry by the Commission is, one I touched on a bit earlier, and I think is maybe a more obvious one, given the context within which we work, and I think it's been quite a priority and will be quite a priority of the Commission going forward. And these are the barriers to entry, expansion, and participation in the market. So the Commission has flagged that they're going to give specific consideration to the barriers faced by small, medium, and micro enterprises, or SMMEs, and HDPs, or historically disadvantaged persons, in being able to obviously enter the market, at any point along this value chain, but also, compete effectively and sustain themselves in the market. Because I think based on the research they did and the decrease in farming units, I think they've reached some form of sort of interim conclusion that there are market participants, or there are those that are able to try into the market, but they aren't able to sustain themselves or compete effectively. And that's what we've seen in the result in at least a decrease in farming units. And they see the agricultural value chain as highly industrialized, but also characterized by a high degree of coordination. So firms that working together in the sort of vertical value chain, and what they've generally seen is large scale commercial farming, and concentration in the value chain, not much room or much scope for these smaller players. And there's some concern from sort of stakeholders that since the deregulation of the agriculture markets, the use of cooperatives, the outcomes have mostly benefited larger players in this market. Again, this is how the Commission sees it at this point. So that's obviously an area that they're going to investigate to see if this is correct, and obviously how it may affect end consumers. And again, what they say is that the nature of cooperatives favor the members naturally of cooperatives, and don't seem to include new and smaller players. The question is obviously why, and how does this play out? So I think these are all very important considerations for you to think about going forward. I mean, the Commission is quite, sort of robust in the stance they've taken, at least in their initial the guidelines or the report that they released, and how they're going to conduct the inquiry. And they've termed this a large scale or nothing dynamic in the value chain. So it's quite interesting to see how they may investigate this. Again, they've been quite specific, which is obviously helpful for us. And again, I think these are themes that we probably would have guessed. They're going to look at access to markets, discriminatory practices in relation to inputs, outputs, access to financial support, equitable access to water resources and land. Because I think the Commission sees these as the sort of broader, more general barriers that prevent farmers from, I think, achieving the necessary scale to become efficient, expand outputs, and reduce prices, which I think is ultimately what the Commission is trying to get at here. We've got the small farmers and we've got the end consumers, and they're trying to balance the interests and needs of both of those sort of long term. So I'm just going to hand back over to Ros, who's going to take us through the duration of the FPMI or the inquiry, and a few takeaways and a general conclusion.
Thanks so much, James. Yeah, so lots to think about for everyone. Just in terms of the duration of the inquiry, so it will only come, well, the time period will only start running on a date that the Commission will announce. This has to be at least 20 days after the terms of reference are published. And then they've got 18 months to complete. Now, the Commission has never completed a market inquiry in 18 months. All of them have required extension. But as noted, I think there might be some pressure to get this one done. And so we certainly would probably see a sort of provisional report quite quickly, depending on how the investigations go. The Commission is going to, what they usually do is they have a sort of a sub website for the market inquiry that will set out the timelines, public hearings, and will include submissions made by participants. One thing I would just like to touch on is that, this is it's very important in the scope of the competition framework to make sure that you're protecting your confidential and competitively sensitive information. So, one of the things that's really important if you are making submissions to the Commission or you are engaging with them, obviously first prize is to be legally represented, because anything you say to the Commission can and will be held against you at some point. But it is really important to make sure that you are protecting your confidential information, because these submissions are published, and it's important for you to then to make sure that you've got a redacted version so that your information is protected. So that's just an important aspect of the process. Yeah, so we don't expect it to be done in the time frame, but we do expect them to kick off very quickly, because we do know that the commissioner, well, the deputy commissioner has indicated that this is a great priority and they will be moving forward very quickly. Actually, just on that, we'd heard that at an event in Europe, he had specifically mentioned that they would be including in the assessment seed. It seems to be a big focus for them, not obviously not oil seeds and whatnot, but seed for production, and also looking at the retailers, even though this wasn't really the focus. So it really is going to be quite broad and is receiving a lot of attention. Okay, so just last slide, please, James. Just some takeaways. There's a lot to think about. And in some ways, I would say that, these inquiries are to be welcomed, because no doubt you have been frustrated by developments in the sector or a government intervention that may not have the desired outcomes. And so this is an opportunity to present the industry's side of the story to the Commission, for a body to have an overarching view, and to provide that information. It is difficult, though, when you're going in, when they've got a preconceived idea of what they're expecting to find in the sector. So certainly, I would say to you that if you choose to participate, or you're called on to participate, you need to think about whether that's something that you want to do. But also think not only about the impact on you negatively, but how can I contribute to the Commission's understanding of the sector in a way that will result in good outcomes. And the outcomes, it's in everyone's interests to have a competitive sector that is functioning well. So that's important. So just, think about that. Think about whether as an industry association you want to participate. Just when you do participate voluntarily, you are in a much better position, because you can control your narrative in the information that you provide. So, sometimes when you are summoned or you're on the back foot in responding, you might have to do it under time pressure. And you might not have time to formulate things correctly, or it doesn't come across as well. So where there are key messages to be delivered, often it's better to do that proactively. And then I would just say to you, have you considered your competition law compliance? Have you thought about it recently? There were a lot of changes that came into the law in 2019, and with COVID, the focus has been on price gouging and so on, and so we haven't seen major prosecution of these rules. But what happened during COVID is that the bar for determining whether a firm is dominant or whether they have market power has reduced quite a lot. So it's much easier for the Commission to prove that someone is dominant, and therefore there are other laws that apply, or rules that apply to your operations. So, whenever a regulator is going to be looking into your operations, it's well worth checking that you are compliant up front, rather than finding that out along the way. So just more important things to think about. And that's about it. We don't have a full 15 minutes for questions, but we've got a bit of time if anybody has any they'd like to ask. Okay, well, I'm going to take it that we've explained this so very well that no one has any questions, or we're stunned everyone into silence. So, oh wait, we've got one question. Before.
Okay, Rosalind, we've got Sandy Lamarck from KZN. Sandy, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I just want to check if I just was wanting to find out, in the last slide, you made mention of, as an industry, what is important for the Commission to know or be aware of. So my question relates to Agri SA and its affiliates. Would Agri SA be able to make a submission as the industry leader, if I could use that term, with respect to this, which may in some way protect some of our smaller members or members that are concerned? I mean, we've had a lot of inquiries from our vegetable growers in particular, and they've been able to provide me with evidence of market prices, what's on the shelf. They've shown me pictures, and I mean, there's such a massive difference between what they get at farm gate and what it's been sold for on the floor. So yeah, just, you know, just a general question in terms of, are we as a industry body able to make a submission, and what would that implication be if we were allowed to? Thank you.
So there's nothing restricting you legally from doing that. That would be a decision for the body to make. So it's very common for industry bodies to do that. So I can't answer on behalf of Agri SA for that.
Are you okay, Sandy?
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Neil. I think that the Commodity Chamber might have to have this discussion and see if there's merit, if, you know, we as an organization do put something in. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Sandy. Brandy, I'm going to give over to Jack Ormer for his question, then you can take over again. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks for the presentation and informing us all. I might have missed it in the beginning, but where does the actual complaint come from? You know, what is the reason for the complaint? And just in the context of climate change and stuff, localization is being promoted as a means to save a lot of energy and whatever. But you've got economies of scale, and you've got efficiencies, and you've got seasons as well. So you need big logistics to transport avos when it's out of season to the housewife who wants avos every day of the month in her house. So it is going to cost you more certain times of the year as other times of the year. In the context of where does it come from, you know, if government is comparing their programs to the efficiencies of the private sector, the government, there's so many efficiencies in the government program. So it's important for this commission to look at, you know, why are the government programs costing so much and their products costing so much to get onto the market? But also a big game changer that's happened recently is all these online trading platforms. Nile, I know Nedbank's developed Avo, Hello Choice that works closely with Agri SA and Standard Bank. So all these online trading platforms are making it much easier. They're reducing the transaction costs of markets, but yet you still need your fresh produce markets, your national fresh produce markets, to be working really well, because that's a very good mechanism where prices are set and fixed. But I don't think our government is investing enough into our national fresh produce markets to really make them work well. I know RSA Holdings has got their hands up, and they're doing great work in the fresh produce market space, but I don't know if the government is bringing their share to make our national fresh produce markets work. So there's a lot of criticism, I think, as well, to be thrown at government, but I think the crux is, you know, why, if you can answer that, please, you know, who instigated the investigation, or I might have missed it in the beginning, sorry.
Okay, sure, no problem. So, you know, I think these are the kind of inputs that are so extremely helpful. You know, the point of this is that, certainly in my experience, is, you know, government has good intentions with many of the programs, but they don't have the outcomes or the success that you would expect. And there are a number of reasons for that across the board. So, but just the reason for the inquiry, you know, the important thing, Jack, to understand is that this is not something that relates to a specific complaint. A market inquiry is a much broader investigation, and the point of it being that there are a number of factors in the market that are leading to uncompetitive outcomes. And so the Commission can't say, oh, it's, Bob in the Free State who's causing this problem. What they're saying is that structurally, the entire sector needs to be looked at holistically so that they can understand where the problems are that are causing these outcomes. So there are going to be, very good and very bad things. But sometimes, the government intervention might be hampered because of something else that they're not aware of. So I think your points are really, really valid. Again, just talking about the climate change and the things that are shifting, these are all very important ways of people to cope and sustain the industry. Obviously, the difference in pricing is getting bigger and bigger for what producers are paid versus what it's sold at, and there are also a lot of factors that go into that as well. So it's not any particular complaint; it's a broad assessment into the entire fresh produce value chain to say what is it that is going wrong here and how can we fix it. That's the intention. Sorry, RSA Holdings.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's Jaco speaking, by the way. It's just the boardroom name that comes.
Yeah, sorry. Hi,
and I'm going to start my video because we are the lucky participant, I would say, of a let me just figure that one out, then you can see me, of a cartel investigation that started in 2017, if everybody would remember that. And 6 years later, there's no outcome. So I would love to understand if the Competition Commission departments talk to each other and understand, because they've had 6 years to do something and to understand the marketplace. And when I look at the terms of reference, I find it extremely concerning that there's zero understanding of the marketplace. And you got all it, and we probably, from an industry perspective, the most investigated industry, if you go from the NAMC, from market investigation, and we operate in an extremely transparent environment. There is no contract. Nobody forces you to buy from anybody. And markets and prices are discovered on fresh produce markets. So it seems to be, for me, like there's this inability to understand the workings of a free market. And you want to understand why there's a difference between what's on the retail shelf and what the farmer gets. It's extremely simple. But I'm a little bit overexcited, and I apologize, but I fail to understand that in terms of the terms of reference, I can't get a feeling that there's an understanding of the marketplace. And that worries me, because there's these processes that are running concurrently that are not being dealt with. And now suddenly we've got another market investigation. So yeah, I'm just going to need some help from our guys in terms of this and the industry, but I'm a little bit concerned about the lack of understanding.
So, Jaco, you've raised some very good points, and I think that's really it. Is it, the terms of reference set out the Commission's understanding of the sector now. What they should hopefully, as part of this process, get the information they need to be able to properly understand the sector and to make recommendations that make sense. In my experience, the Commission doesn't always manage to understand how these things work together. And as to your point about whether they talk to one another, sometimes yes, sometimes no. So, the commissioners who are the decision makers at the Commission have oversight over all of the divisions. But it is my experience that we'll be working on a merger in a sector and we will get a request from their advocacy division where there's been no communication. So I think there is that to some degree. I think the tricky thing for them is that a cartel investigation, it's and that's the thing is it's hard to prove. and it can be very challenging, and people are not, you know, in the past, everyone just sort of used to roll over. You know, you'd have someone who'd applied for immunity and they'd provide lots of evidence, and then everyone said, okay, we'll just all settle. But what has happened is over time, people have realized that if you stand up to the Competition Commission, they're not as equipped to run litigation as private parties sometimes are. And so these investigations take a long time, and they take a long time to deal with. Whereas when they look at a market inquiry, they can get kind of immediate results without having to hit that bar of evidence. And they can kind of get a result in a sector that they would like without having to go through that quite cumbersome complaint process. And so that's why we think, I mean, that's why these provisions were broadened in the way that they were, and they were designed to give the competition authorities much bigger power into looking into things without having to have an actual complaint. And so, yeah, your concerns are bang on. And again, I would encourage the right body to help educate the Commission to understand how these things work. And just one last thing is, although they're the competition authority and they should understand a free market, we have a different dynamic in South Africa. And our competition law protects both the public interest and competition. And unfortunately, those two don't always align. So a capital market that is built on supply and demand, you would think would work well. But the problem is, because there has been historical skewing in concentration and ownership that they want to redress, you can't always fix that with a free market, because there's entrenched discrimination in the setup. And so that's why it's addressed slightly differently. I hear your concerns. We all battle with them on a daily basis, but at least they are looking into it.
That's like fundamental opposites, and yeah, it's exactly what will fix it. But guys, thank you very much. I appreciate the insight, and I'm going to leave. I've got to run for a board meeting, but thank you so much. It was unbelievable. I appreciate it. Thank you to Agri SA as well for putting it together.
You're welcome, Jaco, and thank you for your inputs. Good luck. Rosalind, Francois Knowles, he has got to add something from APAC. We've got some time left. Sorry, we're going to run over 11 o'clock. Francois, if you can be brief, I know it's important. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. And Ros and James, thank you very much for the insightful presentation. As you might know, I'm a regulator of agents in South Africa. That puts me right in the bull ring here. So I would like to just quickly say a few things. To answer Jack, in 2017, there was a search and seizure warrant issued by the High Court to do an investigation into market agents, which sort of puts everybody on the back foot. So just to sort of clarify what it stated at that point in time, it talked about the involvement of role players that prohibited coaching activities or coordinating activities were launched, and this was undercutting prices, etc., etc. And they say that there was price collusion. At that point in time, 9 agencies were investigated, and I agree with Jaco. It's irritating, but there's no outcome to this day. So for me, to be proactive, I would like to leave everybody with this message of don't wait, participate. We started participating with the Commission prior to the publication of the intention to do this inquiry. So the role of APAC is important. We're a creature of statute, and our goals are strongly aligned with what this inquiry seeks to achieve. So we've been meeting with the Competition Commission on a regular basis, and it's really important to get this message over to them to say, you need to know what you don't know. And I fully agree again with Jaco that we need to paint the picture for them. If we sit back and wait and allow them to do their own thing, then they're going to get to something that we don't like and something that will have far-reaching consequences. So quickly, my message to everybody here today is please be aware that the Competition Commission have sharp teeth. So do I, but their teeth seem to be sharper than mine in this instance. The elephant in the room is obviously this whole issue of figures, and I must also be cautioning everybody here to be very, very careful that we boast about the performance of fresh produce markets in particular, because we're not feeding the poorest of the poor, and not everybody's eating today, and that's why these questions are being asked. That relates to another topic called food systems, but we'll get to that sometime in future. Competition in our environment is good, but what is the reference and the relationship in terms of collusion? We need to be very, very specific about those things. Again, if we do not partake and we do not play our role, the outcome will have a major impact on us. It could have far-reaching consequences. I like the reference that was made to misguided power. We need to be very, very specific when we talk to them. So what we're doing is continuous engagement with them. We must make sure that we protect and enhance the role of the farmer in this whole process. Never ever forget that. We talk about intermediaries and the people in the value chain. It all starts with the farmer. We ultimately protecting the farmer, and at the other side, we're protecting the consumer. Never ever forget those two. So quickly, if you look at economics 101, we were taught that it's about supply and demand and you get the ideal price. Let me tell you, at the fresh produce market, there's a lot of screaming and swearing and fighting to get to that ideal price. But that is what makes the system a beautiful system, and that works so well. Fresh produce markets are platforms. The true heroes are the market agents, and we must never underestimate their role. They work really hard to get to that ideal price. Again, just be very careful of what the outcome might be if we do not focus on those things. You talked about disruptors, logistics, and so forth. I think I would also just want to advise everybody, whatever we do, please align the Competition Commission inquiry to the AAMP. That is really important because it talks to inclusivity, and if we get a different answer going forward that is not aligned with the AAMP, we've got a real problem. So my background is I'm formerly an auditor. So let me share the last point with you. If you go and you audit a company, you will come back, and if you don't find something, you'll look for something to find. It's my fear that this is going to be the case, and we need to mitigate the impact of whatever is found. So thank you very much for the opportunity. We'll keep you informed on our progress. We are very, very active with the Competition Commission. We're a little nervous around them. I think they're nervous around us as well, but we want to inform them, give them the true picture, and we'll do everything in our power to protect our beautiful industry. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Francois. And then I would just like to thank Rosalind and James for the presentation. I know our members took a lot of value out of it. And then I think if anyone has questions, just maybe send it to us, and then we can just send it to Rosalind and James, if that is all right. And then we will also make the link available for the recording. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I trust you'll have a wonderful day. I don't know if anyone else maybe wants to add something new.
No, thank you, Franny. Nothing from my side. Just again to Ross and James, thanks a lot for your time. This is important, and I agree with what Francois said. The way we deal with this, it's going to be very important. We've got to follow procedure, and yes, keep in mind the producer and the consumer at the end of the day. Yes, from my side, having a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.